Hey folks, Michael Mann with the Michael Mann Security Services. Welcome to Immediate Responder Training Standard Considerations. So the training standard considerations for your immediate response teams. Hey folks, if you want to get a hold of us, you can get us at contact@michaelmannsecurityservice.com. You can always call me at 615-956-3912. Let's get started. So this is not the topics, the training topics or modules, but these are things you need to consider. So like if you're leading a group of immediate responder or responders, then what are some considerations that we need to look at before we start to develop the modules? So there's a scope of this. So if this is the first time you're hearing about this immediate response or immediate responders, remember, if you've heard this before, but if you have not, they are armed security personnel, or they could be unarmed, but primarily we would want them armed, especially in the event of an active assailant, who are going to respond to that hostile area when an active shooting is occurring, and in an attempt to isolate the adversary, prevent him or her from becoming mobile, and neutralize that adversary if necessary. Okay? So let's talk about the first training standard consideration as you start to develop your active shooter or immediate responder training modules. So one is employment status. So this is important. So is this proprietary security? So is this like an in-house security function you're leading? Is it volunteers, like at a house of worship, like at a church? Or are these contract security guards that you're managing? So before we can put a standard in place to start with these modules, we need to look at, are these people employed by us, and are there policies and procedures like insurance and other things in place that kind of give us guidelines on what we can train on and what we cannot? If it's a volunteer, we start talking about houses of worship. What's the capability for that, and do they have time? So that needs to be considered when we start talking about employment status, even though volunteers are employees, but because we have so many church security teams now around the country that are standing post, even though they're not getting paid, that's something to think about when we start thinking about considerations. And then are these folks contract security? Because if I am, like, let's say I'm the security manager at a church or even at a corporation, and we've got some proprietary folks or volunteers, and then now we bring contractors in, what is the contractor, what does the actual employer say that you can actually train their employees on? So first of all, what's the employment status of your immediate responder or immediate responders? That's the first consideration. Second is equipment, okay? So when we start looking at this, what's the scope and mission of the services provided? So is this plain clothes, low profile, or is this like uniform, very overt? So we start talking about equipment. Like, what kind of equipment do they have? So this is going to be important. Like the training module we come up with, how they use their equipment or how their equipment plays into the response. What kind of equipment do they currently have? If they're plain clothes, low profile or covert, and they're carrying subcompact pistols and very small flashlights, and their intermediate weapons or small weapons that are in their pockets, like smaller batons or OC, pocket OC, well, that's going to really impact how we do training. So there's some different objectives. And there's some other, not just cognitive, but physical just elements or objectives that are going to be different than if we have somebody that was uniformed overt, because they're going to be carrying bigger pistols. They may be able to carry more stuff because they've got these duty belts on, or these web belts, where with plainclothes, because they're trying to conceal, they're minimalists. They're not going to have as much stuff. So like, what equipment are you currently using based on the scope or mission? That's going to be important for training. Your resources or manpower. Is this a solo responder? And so if it is, if you've just got like solo responders at different facilities, what's the budget? Right? So are we paying for this, or is the solo responder paying for it? And then IRT, we start talking about, like, that's an immediate response team. That's more than one person. So we start talking about resources or manpower. Do I have more than two or more? So this team, what's the training look like? So if I'm training a team or an IRT, well, movement and contact, the training for that's going to look different than a solo responder, just like making entry into a room would, or doing some sort of a threshold assessment with one as opposed to two or three or four. So that's the other standard, or one of the other standards or considerations we think about as we develop these training modules. The next thing is environment. What's the target area look like? So my training is going to be based on our target area. What are we protecting? Is it interior or is it exterior? So is it inside a building? Could we be responding outside the building? And some of those tactics of response are going to be different based on, is it inside or is it outside? Okay. And then that last consideration is going to be use of force. What is the scope of it? Are these IERTs or these solo responders, are they acting as private citizens? So are they security officers? are they government agents? Like, are they being, are they police officers that you're paying? And that kind of goes back to their employment status. So this is gonna really shape your training standard and those modules, because again, for use of force, there's some things that are going to be different for that private citizen as opposed to that government agent. Immunities and privileges the government has that we don't as private citizens, that's really going to impact our training standard. All right, so those are some of the training standard considerations to think about before you start implementing active assailant or some sort of immediate response training lessons or classes or courses. Again, if you want to get a hold of us, you can get us at contact@michaelmannsecurityservice.com. You can always call me at 615-956-3912. And remember, folks, it is about prevention, not response.